In 2020, AJL Foundation brought together families and youth, community organizers, professionals working within education and human services, teachers, artists, business owners, policy advocates, founders, and entrepreneurs, parents, and neighbors to select 20 nonprofit organizations serving their communities to each receive a $20,000 general operating support grant. The organizations they selected are the experts. They are committed to their communities. They are powerful leaders, guiding and empowering our families and youth. They are critically important, valued, and valuable. They are irreplaceable.
Okay, so name, title, and organization.
All right. I'm Christy Petrie with the AJL Foundation, and I'm the executive director. AJL's mission is to invest in the people, programs, and movements that benefit our families and youth here in Colorado. And a participatory grant-making process helps us to do that by, bottom line, better understanding the issues and then turning the money over to the folks who actually can make progress in addressing the issues. And it's that simple, really.
I have the honor of being the facilitator of the AJL Participatory Grantmaking strategy. So I got a chance to work with the very people that were sitting at the table and making some of the most important decisions in our community about funding and the outcomes that those funding strategies would ultimately have. Dr. Dwanita Mosby Tyler, DWINITA MOSBY TYLER. I am the chief catalyst and founder of the Equity Project.
Adrian H Molina, also known as Molina Speaks. I'm an artist. All right, so as a live scribe poet, my job is to take everything that's being said and to take everything that's happening in a moment, in a space, and to reflect that all back and to do justice to like the overall spirit of an experience, you know? And of course, I'm like peppering in my own perspective and creativity, but it's really a deeply reflective process.
AJL's participatory grant-making process helps us carry out our mission because we're funding the people that are actually doing the work for the community. So we're not making decisions based on our experience and our knowledge and our lens, but we're putting that in the community's hands and they're making the decisions based on what they actually need. Diane with 2 N's and an E, Miles with a Y, not an I, LES. Or wait, no. DIA, 2 N's and an E, Miles with a Y, not an I, LES. I'm the Community Investments Manager for the AJL Foundation.
Corey Montalvo, CORYMONTALVO. I am the founder and chief plug, CEO, of the Youth Empowerment Broadcasting Organization, better known as Yebo. Applying for the grant was a little bit different from our normal flow. So really just being asked to showcase who we are didn't feel like a pitch. Normally in the grant making process, you feel like you're having to sell something. With AJL, it felt like we were already affirmed. You know, community of our peers said, hey, you're doing great work. So now just who are you? And so that really helped us kind of showcase authentically what we do and what we aspire to do.
In 2017, 2018, criticism started coming out about foundations and how traditional grant making was being done. And we started reading some of the research and the stats and hearing a lot of the conversation around the issues around traditional grant making. And it was stats like communities of color were only receiving 10% of grant making funding. We were hearing a lot about unbalanced power dynamics. A lot of the funding was ending up in the hands of white-led organizations, impacting predominantly white communities, and we didn't have folks of color making the decisions for their communities of where funding was going. So inherently, that's a huge problem. As we were hearing that feedback, we started taking a look at ourselves internally at AJL and realizing that we were committing a lot of this. This was us. We were doing this. And when you look at the stats, a lot of our funding was going to predominantly white-led organizations, not even getting anywhere near the communities we were trying to support due to our small networks and our lack of understanding about the real issues and all of that. And so we started realizing that we needed to change things. And so in 2019, we set out to figure out what is the most effective and equitable way to distribute AJL's grant-making dollars to the communities we're serving within the focus areas of education and human services. And so to do that, we went on a listening tour and we sat down with all the stakeholders of our grant making. So everyone who's impacted, starting with families and youth, community organizers, professionals working at nonprofits, our board and staff, and just sat to listen. What are you seeing around you? What are your communities experiencing? If it's in your jobs, what's happening in your jobs? What are your barriers? Just trying to understand what was going on, and then asking them that question: what is the most effective and what is the most equitable way to distribute these dollars? And what came back loud and clear was a participatory grant-making process.
Participatory grant-making is including all of our stakeholders, especially the people who are most impacted by our funding, and including them in our grant-making process.
When there's so much inequity in the world, it's like, the money is the medicine. And distributing and redistributing some of that wealth, that's what philanthropy should be doing, and should be doing it with the input and with the expertise of community members.
And at the end of the day, funders have to look in the mirror and ask themselves, why is most of the board of trustees white, when those are the people who cut the big checks, when those are the people who create the strategic plans for the foundation and the money? And why are we, as grantees, still forced to code switch to white dominant modes of professionalism and operation? So those are some of the things that need to happen in those rooms. And to disrupt and dismantle that is a very violent process that I don't know if folks are ready for.
Are we actually even addressing any of the challenges? Do we even understand the challenges? Who's making the decisions? When you look at the data and the research, it's predominantly older, white, wealthy folks making decisions with money and where it goes that affect predominantly brown and black folks on the ground. And so that is inherently broken. That doesn't work. And so traditional grant making does not work.
A lot of times money is spent like in the name of community, but like people who are being impacted or people who are doing the work, they're not part of the process, And with AJL Foundation in this participatory grant-making experience, community is brought to the table, and people who are working with organizations, working with folks in the streets, working with people in community centers, really doing the work, like we get to be part of the experience of saying where this money should go. And then the other aspect is that the grantees, they get an opportunity to get a chunk of money and to be trusted with that money, to do what they do best.
The grant-making process is as important as the dollars going out the door. So how can we use that process to build relationships, to bring people together, to have hard conversations, honest conversations, and then share that out to the nonprofit sector and philanthropy and beyond?
So from start to finish, our process, which is still evolving and unfolding, but in Q1, we recruit our grant committee. So me and Christy have a grid that we follow.
And within that profile grid, we start targeting what are the different experiences and then also characteristics that we're looking for, and demographics. And so we start out, we need to make sure that we have youth and families on our committee. We need to make sure we have community organizers on our committee. We want to make sure we have professionals working in nonprofits within education and human services, and then we need a board member and we need a staff member. So that's really our professional experiences that we need. Then we move on. We want to make sure that we've got representation from all of the races across Colorado, as well as age groups, as well as genders, as well as sexual orientations, and then also geographic location. We fund in Metro Denver and the San Luis Valley, and so we want to make sure that we have folks from both areas. So we build this profile grid, and that's what the foundation we start out with for recruiting. As we recruit, we also offer a paid position on this committee, so we pay for folks' time. For this committee, it's about $1,000 for 10 hours of work. And then we also share the job description, expectations, and again, it's 10 hours, and so that's broken across 3 meetings. And then we bring folks on. We recruit about 10 to 15 folks. And then we sit down and reassess the committee again to see, are we missing any voices? Who are we missing? If we are missing voices, then we want to make sure we're aware of that so we can address that as we go through the process as well.
I haven't done a lot of committee work of this nature. This was the first yes for me. And it was an easy yes, having an opportunity to participate in something that is really groundbreaking, something that's fresh, something that's new, and something that challenges the world of philanthropy to do things different, to do things better, to do things that are truly rooted in community.
In Q2, we have our first grant-making committee meeting, and we really get to know each other, and it's a safe space for us to just be vulnerable and honest about why we're here and why we wanted to be a part of the AJL grant-making committee. We also have some conversations around like the organizations that we fund and just getting everybody familiar with how the entire grant-making process will go. Each of our grant committee members gets to nominate 2 to 3 organizations that will submit an application to AJL.
Being the facilitator for the participatory grant-making process was easy for me because I was only the guide. The community members that were trailblazing in this process really facilitated. So I was really happy to just be able to create the atmosphere for the beautiful work that they did. And I learned through the process that in many cases, that's all we really have to do. It's just provide the right environment, and the rest of the beauty happens through the people in the environment.
It just felt like, like family, like community. And the way that everything was facilitated, the opportunity to speak openly from the heart, the opportunity to be with diverse community from all walks of life, all races, colors, cultures. It felt really good. It felt really whole.
We do not do traditional LOIs, letters of interest. We have a quick questionnaire for organizations to complete, and our grant-making committee can look at those organizations that have completed that. Organizations do not have to submit a new LOI. The questionnaire that they complete, we keep it for infinity. It is there forever. So there's not that extra work that they have to do every year coming back to organizations. Their information is there. They're also able to bring in other organizations that they know outside that are just doing the work that may not even be on our radar or even know that AJL exists and have never completed a questionnaire. Our philosophy is make this work as easy as possible for the organizations so they can do the actual work with the communities. We don't want to put any more pressure on their back end, so we make sure that the application asks for basic information, the information that we really need to know, and to make sure that they meet all of our criteria and are within our mission, vision, and values. In the second grant-making committee meeting, each of our committee members gets to have a little conversation about the organizations that they nominated and why they nominated them. After our second meeting, we then go to vote. So we created a document that has all of the applications linked in this document, but we give, a snapshot of each of the organizations, their mission, their vision, their values, what they do, who they serve. And our committee members vote on their top 20 organizations. They go to our board members and are presented to our board so our board can approve.
We engage our board through the grant-making process by including one board member on our grant-making committee. So that person is present and involved in all of the decision-making and all 3 meetings.
And then in our third meeting, which is our final meeting, we bring all of our stakeholders to the table.
And it's not something that normally happens with foundations, is not only bringing their entire grantee pool together, but also the people who make decisions on these grants. And then also the board of directors or the board of trustees. Normally in foundations, you don't have access to the board of trustees. And I think it's that door that always makes me wonder, why aren't these people in the room? Why am I only engaging with the program officers or the executive directors? Because I know that the decisions are coming from that room. So to be able to drop that veil and to have us all in one space was a beautiful thing, and it just builds that trust of having that access to different people within the foundation.
We do a brief introduction of everybody that's on the call, and then we hear directly from our grant partners.
It just didn't feel like a pitch. It felt more like we were showcasing who we are and what's important to us. And it also felt very, very good to know that this was a community of young people, of families, folks who actually are on the ground and in your communities, affirming you and your work.
Not only did you get to hear about what they were already doing in their work, you got to hear some future thinking about what would be possible if they were funded in their work. And I think when you sit community members together to hear about that and to talk about that and to vet organizations in such a healthy way, on the other end of that, what you get are the right set of organizations to carry the work for that moment and for that movement.
They get to have an open and honest conversation of what they need from the field of philanthropy, what needs to change, and how to best serve them.
I'll start off by saying in the Maasai warriors in Eastern Africa have a saying when they go to villages. They say, "Kinsirian Njira," which means, "How are the children?" And I work directly with youth, and the children, in a lot of instances, are not well. And so although this is a great space, this is a wonderful, wonderful space to be in, we got to hop off this call, and the children are still dealing with a lot. And so I really encourage you all to check in with the young people in our communities and wrap them with love and support.
We have to learn to center our work on community, especially young people, and people who have the lived experience to be able to drive it in the way that it needs to take shape and shift. We have to give real leadership roles, including sharing power in the work.
And I think that by supporting that cycle, continuing to grant money to leaders in the communities that they grew up in, that they're from, understand that we love our communities. We love them so much. They're embedded in everything that we do and everything that we think. My students are my entire world. So the work that I do, you will see that.
Now, my Google Calendar right now is color-coded so that every time I'm working with a Black woman, it's purple. Every time I get to coach or train or support a Black woman, it's purple, because that's my love and that's my heart. And so my ask of you is to help me and keep my calendar purple. So that means less back office work, less paperwork, less funder meetings. And I want to ask that on behalf of all of my other colleagues that help us keep our calendars purple, where we get to stay on the front line doing the work with the people we love the most and are trying to serve. So to the extent that you can streamline paperwork and communication and reduce the back office burden, please help us there. I ask you to challenge your assumptions about best practice and be willing to learn from us, because we know our communities.
We spend 2 hours together so that we can really sit and listen and hear from the communities we're serving and the folks who are serving those communities, and have very honest, real conversation. And that is a change, because our board is typically removed from the process. They would read grant applications, or they would see the websites, or see some feedback and quotes, but there just really is no substitute for hearing directly from folks about what's happening and what's going on. And so it's a really powerful way to engage the board. And from what I saw our board walk out of that meeting with a completely new understanding of the issues and the opportunities, and what our role is as a foundation in supporting communities. And it was just a really powerful way to engage the board and get them closer to the work so that they understand what we're doing.
This is my wish, to have requirements to all funders, right? Whether locally and nationally, to require their board of trustees or their board of members to spend time in the local grassroots organizations in our communities, in our neighborhoods, to meet and build relationships directly with our participants, with our community members.
I think the thing that we need to focus on post-COVID is that the level of support that we're offering our people now is going to change, because before we might have been supporting them when there was one income in the house or maybe two incomes in the house, but sometimes now the support we give them, there's no income. COVID has taken all their income away, or even the other supports that they've had. some of the programs that they used to go to may be closed now.
Hearing everyone on this call today, these powerful visions, powerful missions against all odds. We're trying to end the school to jail pipeline. We're trying to end poverty. We're trying to end violence. And we're supposed to do this on shoestring budgets with like no resources and, in this model of nonprofit scarcity. So I think we're really asking for philanthropy to lean into abundance, lean into adequately supporting us and giving us the resources we need.
Expect success to take time. These disparities and these injustices weren't created in a year. And so you're not going to see all kinds of great progress in a year. It takes time. So dig deeper on what value and metrics and success look like.
They have the power. They get to tell us what we need to do for them.
It's not prescribed. It isn't that the grant maker gets to decide what's important. It opens up a dialogue, and a very authentic and frank one, in communities around what's really important, what really ought to get funded, and what a real, hardworking, legitimate organization is doing already. I think when you put all of those components together in a dialogue, what you end up with on the other end of it are organizations that are best poised to create the outcomes that we want in our communities.
If we're going to transform communities in Denver, we've got to transform enough lives and families, and we can't do it alone.
When we're framing our young people, the people in our community, the people we serve in this work, we need to do so through an asset-based lens, okay? Frame them and see them through their assets and their contributions, as well as their visions and desires, all right? They're not low income, they're not poor, they're not colors. They're brilliant people that have a world of potential. And if we uplift them as that, the world's going to change. Thank you for having me.
One of my third graders told me, Maestra, you'll never know how far you'll fly if you don't open your wings. And I just want you to know that you gave me alas. You gave me wings. So thank you so much.
Having community lead the organizations that we funded, really brought about some organizations that I think we just would have never been on our radar based on relationships and based on how philanthropy traditionally does this. So we got to fund a lot of organizations that were grassroots, that are in the communities, that are doing the work. Like FUBU, For Us, By Us, I think is the only way that you can do grant making in a way that actually does the work.
In our old model, had we tried to understand that the answer to that question, what needs to change to better support our families and youth, we wouldn't even have gotten close to the answers that came up in this 2-hour meeting. And so the benefits from relationships building to networking to supporting each other to that's all within the room, and then outside of the room, the benefits just go from there.
And there's not a lot of spaces that seat I'm talking the grantees as partners. Normally in philanthropy, we're seated as competition. And so this space really helped us collaborate and learn from one another. And I think a lot of things that surfaced for me is really just trying to understand what is important to different types of young people and being responsive, because we can get into this world where we think we know everything about our communities. We think we've been embedded for years in one particular community and we understand everything that they need. But then when you hear it from a different lens, people tackling different issues, it really adds a dynamic essence to how we can see the people we serve.
A lot of people call me and want to take me to lunch and take me out to eat. And it's refreshing that we're not doing this process in a way that organizations think they have to woo me in order to receive funding. I always tell people the power really isn't in my hands, it's in the community members' hands. I'm one voice at the table of many voices. My voice doesn't carry any more weight than anybody else's voice does. And if we want to do grant making the way that we're supposed to do it, that's how this has to be. We have to take ego out of funding. We have to take the power out of our hands, and we have to put it in the community's hands. And so I think, for me, the impact was having community lead the charge and me taking a back seat and listening to them and honoring them.
As an executive director, a CEO, I spend so much time seeking foundations and seeking resources and pitching and selling. This was a process where that came to us, and it helps me sustain myself. And so instead of having to go out and have a million coffees, you get an email and you apply. The process is so much more efficient, and also calls to, just helping me operate as a CEO.
From start to end, the process was amazing, the way the dollars got out the door, but what we saw happening in these meetings with these groups in the room was just incredible. There was so much rich conversation. There was so much understanding and support and love and just the depth of emotion in a really positive, productive way, having hard conversations. And there was so much truth and honesty, and it was just a really incredible to be a part of that process and see that happen.
There's people that I've worked with years ago who I didn't expect to come back into contact with through this process. And there's people I've admired from other corners of the city, artists, organizers, business leaders. And then all of a sudden, there's all these people together, and there's funny moments, there's meaningful moments, there's heartfelt moments, there's laughter, there's tears.
There were so many memorable moments for me in the participatory grant-making process, but the one that I will always remember was an instance where I actually was able to visibly see love. I could visibly see love between the members of the group that were just introducing their organizations. When you can see love, it's easy to imagine what it would be like to manifest it through grant making. And I got a chance to bear witness to love in action. That's the beauty of participatory strategies. In grant making, love comes to life.
One of the things that we heard from our grant partners on that last call was that we needed to go back and share this information with the rest of Philanthropy. So we were fortunate enough to have Adrian, a live scribe artist, on our grant making committee, and he created this amazing live scribe of everything that we heard on that call and everything that our grant partners are asking for.
And so the inspiration behind this open holiday recipe for philanthropy, what I was hearing as we were approaching the holiday season, I was hearing a recipe, I was hearing basically a list of requests, a list of demands, a list of a whole litany of recommendations for the field of philanthropy. But it's in cultura, in community, we're at our best when we're creative. And when there's food, when there's sabor, when there's flavor in the process, So I'm okay, this isn't just a list of demands, this is a recipe. An open holiday recipe for philanthropy. Ingredients: delicious intention, 1,000-pound gorilla, 800 pounds of authenticity, a genuine belief that lived experience drives social change, a pandemic-sized dose of truth, reality, and radical honesty, 21 grams of soul buried beneath the principles of philanthropy. Mix all ingredients into a clay Technicolor pot. Add poetry, music, visual art, and community input. This is an entire celebratory, even though we're challenging you, philanthropy, we're challenging you. We're asking you, we're telling you, we're demanding that you do something different, but we're doing it with flavor. We're giving you a recipe to make this juicier, to make it tastier, to bring all of us together, all of our human relations to come together and enjoy a new world, a new possibility. And it could be fun, and it could be flavorful. We're gonna challenge you, but we're gonna give you the ingredients, and the ingredients are gonna be tasty. Directions. Recognize that we are at the pinnacle of global crises and rethink everything. Know that the children are not well and that there is no future time to be brave. Redefine whiteness. Listen to people of color. Root into indigenous perspectives. Stand with Black lives and immigrants. Give women of color space to lead. Streamline applications and reporting. Allow for risks and co-learn from failures. Challenge assumptions about best practices. Fund general operations for longer periods of time. Require less funder meetings and back office burden. Lift the restrictions and provide unrestricted access. Make the process simple and demystify the system. Invest in honor and take bold action without hesitation. So let's do this. Let's move what we need to move so we can get to a new place and be in better relation to each other. And let's feast. Let's enjoy. Let's enjoy this this change that we're trying to make. So that was the intention and the vibe, and that's what I was seeing, was just a whole gathering of people, all our cultures, all our relations coming together to just feast and enjoy a new day and a new world, a sixth sun of possibility. Nutrition, cooking time, and celebration. Let it all simmer. Bring it to a boil and smolder. Stir the pot and make good trouble. This harvest feast is long overdue. Move more money in 2021 and recommit in 2022. This is a new holiday recipe for the reclamation of the human soul. Lip service has been paid to some of the ingredients embedded here, but this exquisite and tantalizing recipe has yet to be tried. It is time to reject the inclination towards saviorism and step away from the performance of philanthropy. Shift into an assets-based lens and trust the most impacted to teach us all about our collective survival. The only way to save the funders is to give it all away. Give what is due back to those from whom it was stolen. It is time to fund and finally allow for the great turning, a repairing, a generous reintroduction to ourselves. Give as much money away as possible, then get out of the way. We will rebuild our trust in one another with our hands, our breath, our blood, our hope, and our love. When it is time, be present, dance, and celebrate the grand victory with the grantees. One day, they will be your fellow grantors. I'd say that there's a lot of fear in doing community work, running a nonprofit organization, doing grassroots work. There's a lot of fear that you're not gonna have a job next year, or you're not gonna have the funding to keep things moving. You're not gonna be able to provide the programs and services that community has come to rely on. So I feel like this process kind of dispels the fear. And so you can come to the table and speak honestly. And that's what we need, is radical honesty to change the world, to change the way that things are done. Everything needs reimagined, we need to rethink and redesign everything in order to be sustainable as humans on this planet. So this is a small but essential part of that process.
I think the old model, we're so comfortable with it because it's how it's been done for the history of philanthropy. But this new model, even, having to make sure everybody's there and they're attending meetings and they're nominating organizations, it's doing the work in a way that is culturally responsive, respectful, and ethical. There's
so many different cultures. There's so many different community interests and actors. So it takes, facilitation strength. It takes a lot of love, a lot of courage, a lot of insight. It takes a lot of work to keep all that together. So that's a major challenge.
When we start to do something more innovative, trailblazing, like AJL's process in participatory grantmaking, we don't have as much practice with it. We also know that it takes risk-taking, and oftentimes people are afraid of that. And so to institutionalize participatory grantmaking means we have to get people accustomed to risk-taking, to evaluating differently, to giving up power and control and allowing it to sit where it really does belong, which is with the community. So I think we're on the right track, and if we just know up front what our barriers are going in, the world's possibilities increase.
And it is so worth it. The few barriers that pop up or challenges are so worth it for the end product and how it happens.
What this does is it challenges the sector of philanthropy. It really requires philanthropy to question what it is that philanthropy is seeking to accomplish and how it's going to do it. And so I think this is an important challenge to that sector of philanthropy.
For foundations considering a participatory grant-making process, I urge you to make sure you're listening to the communities. Make sure that you're addressing power dynamics.
We're learning as we go. The only way we're going to change how philanthropy has been done is by getting in there and actually doing the work. So we know the studies, we see the research, we understand how philanthropy needs to be done. Now it's about taking action and actually doing the work. So just do the work.
Current philanthropic model is just like every other system in this country, rooted in white supremacy and racism. So I think we have to address that first and foremost. I think there's a lot of existential things philanthropy has to ask themselves in order for us to advance this work in the right ways. One, are you really trying to solve the problem? And I ask that because the source of a lot of this money is problematic. It's created the very problems that funders are asking us to solve. And so one thing that was brought up by a young person in our organization, he's 19, as we were going through a design process, he just stopped our process and he goes, why are we trying to solve racist problems or problems that were created by white people? Why is that our work? Why can't we just live? Why can't we just be? Why do we always have to be solving someone else's problems? And that helped me realize that, the work shouldn't be problem-based. You shouldn't ask us what problems we're solving. You should ask us what we're trying to learn. And I think that philanthropy has to ask itself what it's trying to learn and if it's really trying to do anything around these issues.
My advice to other foundations that are considering participatory grant making is to get out of the way. If you're not willing to get out of the way, I'd say you're probably not ready for this journey yet. If you are able to do a little risk-taking and to allow the voices of community to reign through in your process, then this is the thing to do.
In a lot of cases, you may not be the right person to build relationships with communities. And in all likelihood, you're probably not the right person. Had I done this on my own, we never could have done this. There's a deep distrust of white folks, and that is warranted. And it's something that a lot of us just we can't get over because it is warranted. And so when you're looking at hiring, when you're looking at grant making, every aspect, every level of your foundation, you need to bring in folks from the communities you're serving to do this work in the right way, effectively, and as a whole human. This is the direction we need to go in.
People in the community doing the work are the experts. And that's not to say that people who are directors of foundations or executive directors or people who are on the staff, they have a role to play, but the role is to work with community. It's not to judge community. It's not to think that you have the right answers when you aren't doing this certain type of work. It's the educators know what they're doing in the education field. The people who are providing direct services to folks who are in need, they know what they're doing. People who are doing culturally responsive, culturally relevant work with youth, they know what they're doing, right? So this idea that in a foundation, only a certain number of people who are on the inside making all the decisions and they're gonna know how best to fund programming, it's an outdated idea that's overly paternalistic. It's rooted in control and fear, and it needs to be changed.
To fund ideas, to fund work is beautiful, and it helps sustain a lot of what's really driving positive things in our community. But at the end of the day, we're still beholden to wealthy white people's money to continue this work. So what does authentic investment mean? And I think we get into an uncomfortable conversation if you're a funder. What does power and control mean to you? Why do you have a foundation that only gives 5 to 10% of its endowment away a year and is able to invest the rest? And why does that happen in perpetuity? And so we have to ask these very uncomfortable questions of why do you want to maintain this wealth and control over people? Or are you really trying to decolonize wealth? And that's what I don't think a lot of funders are about or even have a concept of. Because if you're trying to decolonize wealth, then the conversation's around how do you seed, how do you let go of your control and power of this money?
These older models of funding, they're rooted more in like fear and distrust of community. They're rooted in an idea that like people wouldn't know what to do with the money, like, which is crazy. You know, it's like there's so much inequity and there's so much like struggle and suffering that people deal with. Like, we just need to get the money out and trust the folks who are doing the work.
When we test for our outcomes, when we evaluate what we've done, when we look for changes in our societies, we should be able to track it back to how we got to grant making in the first place. Who got the grants? How did we measure and monitor those? Then the decision makers that were a part of that, what's their investment now in the system? If we're able to do that kind of work, which is in many ways disrupting the status quo, I think all of us would really be proud to see outcomes that are nowhere near the kinds of outcomes that we see today. I'm excited about those possibilities.
I say just keep doing it, you know, and see what we learn over a period of time. I don't have any direct feedback on like how to change it or improve it, other than like, let's get more money and give even more money out and fund more organizations, because it's such essential funding, you know, and it's such an essential opportunity, like no strings attached. Take this money, do something real with it. We trust you to do it your way. Come back and tell us what you learned, and tell us how to improve what we're doing. Like that's everything, you know, for an organization that's trying to do real work in the community.
Foundations can best serve nonprofits by coming down from the perch and getting on the ground, and engaging not only the people that grant, but the communities that we serve as people, and embrace humanity. So much of philanthropy is esoteric and out of reach and hard to access. So foundations need to, this is not even an ask, you need to come down and be with the people and learn, because you can't say you support people if you're not side by side with them. You can't say you know what the issues are if you're not side by side with them. So come from the offices, come downstairs and walk alongside of us.
AJL serves as a trailblazer in this work, and communities get a chance to see it, do it, and articulate it out, hopefully in a way that influences other foundations and grant makers in the work that they're doing.
I'm just extremely appreciative of AJL, of trying to shake up the way we do grant making process. Nothing's perfect, and you know, I think we have to keep in mind too Dr. King's thoughts around, he just basically said, be careful of incremental change. We need to celebrate the work that's being done, different mindsets, different ways of doing this work, but we also can't accept anything that's not liberation. So I encourage funders, I encourage folks in philanthropy to really push themselves and get uncomfortable, and don't think that hiring people of color is enough. Don't think that putting a few folks on your board who are Black or brown is enough. Don't think giving to more people of color is enough. Really think about how to fundamentally interrogate your white supremacy and fundamentally engage in a process of liberation, even for yourself.
I believe there's a critical mass that happens when you have a greater number of organizations and a greater number of people involved in the process. If we can combat the status quo of grant making, imagine what changes, what outcomes, what new strategies we'd see in our communities. So let's keep going and let's keep growing.
My advice to other organizations that are seeking to engage in this process, you don't have to invent this from scratch. You know, the AJL Foundation is leading this work. You know, the leaders of the AJL Foundation, like, they are creating a template. You know, so look to this foundation as a leader, you know, and see what you can learn. Do things your way, but like there's a blueprint, you know, and that's part of the reason that I'm involved in this. Like, it's an essential, revolutionary, evolutionary step forward. So there's people that you can ask.